The cafe was quiet, a cozy refuge from the bustling streets of the small city. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries wafted through the air, wrapping around the patrons like an invisible embrace. Among them sat a girl, her dark glasses shielding her unseeing eyes, her cane resting against the table. She was a regular here, known for her gentle smile and her ability to navigate the world without sight with a grace that left many in awe. Her name was Eleanor, but most people called her Ellie. At 17, she was independent, curious, and fiercely determined. The cafe had become her sanctuary, a place where she could study, enjoy the comforting hum of life around her, and sip on her favorite vanilla latte. She had come to know the regulars by their voices and the rhythms of their movements. It was her world, vibrant and full, even if her eyes could not perceive it. Today, however, something was different. As she settled into her usual corner, she felt an unusual presence. It wasn't the shuffle of feet or the murmur of conversation. It was something deeper, a silent resonance that prickled at the edges of her awareness. It was as if the air itself had shifted, carrying a subtle charge that she couldn't quite explain. The door chimed, and Ellie heard the sound of footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and accompanied by a faint scraping noise, almost like the dragging of scales against wood. A shiver ran down her spine. She focused on her surroundings, her senses sharpening as she tried to make sense of the presence. "Excuse me," a voice said, deep and resonant. It was unlike any she had heard before, carrying a strange, melodic quality that made her heart race. The voice seemed to ripple through the air, touching something primal within her. "May I sit here?" Ellie turned her head toward the voice, her lips curving into a polite smile. "Of course. It's a free country." The stranger settled into the chair opposite her, the scrape of the seat against the floor unusually loud. Ellie could feel the weight of his presence, as if he occupied more space than his physical form should. She tilted her head, curious. "Are you new around here?" "You could say that," the voice replied, hesitant but kind. "I'm not from around here." Ellie's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup. "Your voice is different," she said, her tone thoughtful. "It's beautiful in a way, like it doesn't quite belong to this world." The stranger laughed softly, a sound that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "You're very perceptive." "I have to be," Ellie replied. "When you're blind, you learn to notice things that other people might miss." There was a pause, and Ellie felt the stranger's gaze on her, heavy and contemplative. "Blind?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and something else she couldn't quite place. "Since birth," she said simply. "But it's not so bad. I get to experience the world in my own way." The stranger was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "That's admirable. Most would see it as a limitation." Ellie smiled. "It's all about perspective. You learn to adapt, to find beauty in the things you can experience. Like now, I can hear the warmth in your voice. It tells me you're kind." The stranger seemed taken aback, but he quickly recovered. "Thank you. That's very generous of you." They fell into a comfortable silence, the cafe's ambient noise filling the gaps in their conversation. Ellie found herself strangely drawn to this stranger. There was something otherworldly about him, a sense of mystery that intrigued her. "What brings you here?" she asked after a while. "Curiosity," he replied. "I've heard about places like this, where people gather and share moments of their lives. I wanted to see for myself." Ellie chuckled. "It's a good place for that. You meet all kinds of people here, including remarkable ones like you, he said, his tone sincere. Ellie felt her cheeks heat up. That's kind of you to say. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing effortlessly. The stranger, who eventually introduced himself as Kale, was unlike anyone Ellie had ever met. He spoke of distant places with a vividness that made her heart ache with longing. He described skies of shifting colors, forests that sang with the wind, and oceans that glowed with bioluminescent light. Ellie listened, captivated, her mind painting pictures of these fantastical landscapes. You have an incredible imagination, she said, her voice tinged with awe. Kale hesitated before replying. Perhaps, or perhaps I've simply seen things that most people can only dream of. Ellie tilted her head, sensing the weight of his words. Who are you really? She asked softly. Kale was silent for a long moment before he spoke. I'm not like you, he said finally. I come from a place far from here, a place where dragons are real and the stars are close enough to touch. Ellie's breath caught. Dragons, she whispered, her mind racing. Kale nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Yes, I am one of them. For a moment, Ellie didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to laugh, to dismiss his words as a fanciful tale. But there was something in his voice, a quiet conviction that made her believe him. You're serious, she said finally. I am, Kale replied. I've taken this form to blend in, to experience your world as you do. But in my true form, I am a dragon. Ellie leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. She had always believed in the possibility of otherworldly beings, but she had never imagined she would meet one. Why tell me? She asked. Why trust me with this? Kale's voice was soft. Because you see the world differently. You look beyond the surface, beyond appearances. You see the truth in people. Ellie felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, she said quietly. That means a lot. They continued to meet at the café, their friendship deepening with each encounter. Kale shared stories of his world, and Ellie told him about her life, her dreams, and her struggles. They became each other's confidants, finding solace in their shared moments. One day, Kale took Ellie's hand in his. His touch was warm, his skin rough with the faint texture of scales. I want to show you something, he said. Ellie's heart raced. What is it? Trust me, Kale said, his voice steady. Ellie nodded. I do. Kale led her out of the cafe and into a secluded park. The air was cool, and the sounds of the city faded into the background. Kale guided her to a clearing, his movements careful and deliberate. Stay here, he said, his voice gentle. I'll be back. Ellie waited, her senses heightened. She heard a rustling sound, followed by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. The air grew warmer, and she felt a gust of wind ruffle her hair. Kale, she called out, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I'm here, he replied, his voice deeper and richer than before. Don't be afraid. Ellie reached out, her hands trembling. She felt warm, smooth scales under her fingers, and her breath hitched. You're real, she whispered. I am, Kale said, his voice filled with warmth. And so are you, more real and extraordinary than anyone I've ever met. In that moment, Ellie felt a profound connection, a bond that transcended sight and form. She didn't need eyes to see the beauty of the dragon before her. She could feel it, hear it, and know it in her heart. Their friendship became a beacon of light in both their lives, a testament to the power of trust, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds that could form between two souls, no matter how different their worlds might be.